everyone. I'm Heather Wen, a retired nurse practitioner and the founder and practitioner at Arizona Healing Alternatives. I'm passionate about you knowing what your options are when it comes to your health. So stay tuned for this aha moment. For today, I want to talk about the microbiome. For those of you who haven't heard this word, we'll talk about what does that word mean, why is it even important, and what do you even need to do about it. The reason why I sort of titled this video what I titled it is that sometimes there's almost a war going on within your body between organisms. So between yeast, between bacteria, between good bacteria, between bad bacteria, and sometimes it just feels like a war and you don't feel very good. So here's the thing about the microbiome. All right, what is it? Microbiology, meaning the organisms that live in our gut and in our gastrointestinal system in general, from the mouth all the way down to the end. And what is it? Why is it even important? Well, there's so much of what we eat and so much of what we are is that microbiome. And there's more and more studies, I'm not going to cite them, but there's more and more studies talking about even microbiome and so if we defined it, but even talking about things like emotions that go with it and what it wants to eat, and this sort of thing. And then we look at ourselves and go, well, is it my fault that I have cravings for A, B, and C? Well, if we're looking at the microbiome, let's talk about that. What is it? Well, even though we hear a lot about bacteria, viruses, yeast, all this different stuff, there is a normal balance of that needs to be there. So we don't want to kill off all bacteria, all, yeast, things like that, because that is part of what's called the microbiome. And the microbiome just refers to the mix of, I hate to use the word critters because that doesn't sound very good, but the mix of biology that is in your gut. And why do we even care about it? Well, because if there's an overgrowth, everything in life, and this is true even in Chinese medicine terms, but everything in life is in this beautiful balance. And so if there's too much of anything or not enough of something else, that's what can cause certain problems, is the theory. So what can affect that microbiome? Why do we get an imbalance in the first place? Well, many times if you get a serious bacterial infection, you're going to need to take antibiotics, okay? And let's say it's a serious sinus infection or a serious bacterial infection of some kind. And when you take antibiotics, similarly, they kill the bad guys, but they also kill the good bacteria. And so sometimes when that happens, when you kill off both types of bacteria, then yeast goes, yay, it's party time. And then the yeast can grow because there's, not the other bacteria keeping it in check. This is the whole balance thing. And so with that, oftentimes people have taken multiple antibiotics. It doesn't mean antibiotics aren't necessary, but what it means is if there are alternative ways of treating a bacterial infection, please find that, talking to naturopaths, talking to alternative or functional medicine folks. But there are times, let's say, here in Arizona, we have a lot of valley fever. And so with valley fever, oftentimes, and valley fever is a fungus. Okay, or yeast, a fungus, and there's different types, whether it's yeast, mold, fungus, that goes into way in depth with microbiology. But basically you have to be on antifungals for like 6 months. And there are pluses and minuses to doing all those things that I always want you to check with your practitioners about. But that can happen. So imbalances can happen for multiple reasons. You may need antibiotics, you may need an antifungal, but then it can set things off in the wrong balance, for lack of a better term. Now, I am certainly not an expert on the microbiome, and the people that you need to talk to about it would be people who specialize in that. So when you're looking for people with that, you want to find out people who specialize in that. And what's fascinating is let's take for example like yeast. And you've heard of, yeast can be, it's not just yeast on the skin, it's not just for women, but we're talking about sometimes there's systemic yeast. What does that even mean? It means that yeast has grown to the point that it's all over the body, and it's there's more of it than other things, because even things like E. coli, which we go, oh God, food poisoning. Yes, that's true, but that has to do with E. coli, there's too much of it, and it can make somebody sick. So similarly, if you have too much E. coli, sometimes that can make a urinary tract infection. There's all sorts of different things. And to me, the most interesting part of it is, what are you craving versus what is it feeding? And what is it craving? Which sounds a little creepy, granted. But what it means is, so let's say you have yeast that's going all over the body. Well, all of a sudden, some signs of that can mean when you eat something, you bloat up, or you're noticing that there's more water retention or things like that, and that you're craving, especially yeast loves sugar and carbohydrates and things like that. And so it swells and it eats and it loves it. Now, when I was a women's healthcare nurse practitioner, actually, I know most people probably don't want to talk about this, but basically, when you look at yeast under a microscope, it's really pretty. Sorry. But when I used to look at it under a microscope, it looks like a little tree with little buds on it, and it's awfully pretty, but it's awfully irritating. And so it can cause a lot of inflammation, and it can cause a lot of, if you had yeast on your skin somewhere, it can cause cuts and irritation, and it hurts, and it's not really good. So when it comes down to it, then let's say if you have too much E. coli, then we're talking about food poisoning. If you have too much, all sorts of different microbiome. Now, are all bacteria bad? Okay, that's the whole new, well, it's not new, it's been around for a long time, but all this stuff with the microbiome has to do with, there's bad bacteria. Okay, so this goes into biology of gram negative and gram positive. Okay, we don't need to know all that. What we need to know is there are certain bacteria that are more healthy for a gut, or make the gut happier than bad bacteria. Now, I'm not an expert at which ones are good or bad, except the usual ones that we hear about, like E. coli and some other things like that. But we have to make sure the bad bacteria doesn't get out of control in the same way of yeast. So there's sometimes good bacteria that can be used, and a lot of people take probiotics, biology, bacteria, whatever. So what happens is, you want to get that good balance. Well, there are people that are in the profession that do this. For example, there are people who believe in doing, so like we're going to talk about now the options. There are people that believe that colonics, okay, because in the colon, what we have is when you eat food, it goes down the tract into the small intestine, where all the absorption of your nutrients and vitamins and stuff happens, and then whatever's left over goes into the colon and rolls through until you get rid of it out of the body, right? So what happens is that with a colonic, people who believe in colonics say, okay, well, we need to wash out the colon from time to time, because you can have poisons and toxins that build up that aren't eliminated completely. And if we don't think that people in general, and especially in this country, don't have problems with elimination, all you have to do is watch the TV as to, oh, you're constipated, you're having diarrhea, or you're having colitis, or you're having irritable bowel, whatever it is, right? There's a lot of issues with our colon. And so for some people, they just take out the material and kind of rinse it out. But you really want to find somebody who knows what they're doing, because there's always a risk with any of these things. And so you have to find out what the risks are. You have to find out what the benefits are. And what also happens is, if you're taking stuff out, when you wash that out in a colonic, you're also taking out the good stuff. So how do you replenish the good stuff? And there are some colon therapists, they're called, which I just think are amazing. I'm really fortunate, and there's one amazing one here in Arizona that actually has made her own formula of probiotics that then go into the rectal area. And after you're done getting the colonic, it's a small amount of fluid that's retained, that then the good bacteria divide and things like that. And so it reflorastates. That's a really important word, is to try to find that. Because for me, I think colonics are fine, but if you don't reflorastate, then you're washing out everything. So that being the case, well, how do you do that? Well, there's a lot of probiotics, and I certainly am not a microbiologist to know all this stuff. So please do your research. that there are several that when you take them by mouth, by the time they hit the stomach, it used to be with probiotics, they all had to be refrigerated because they didn't last very long. I know formulations have changed, but oftentimes if you talk to colon therapists that do reflorestation, they say there's really no point in taking them orally because they all die practically by the time they get down to the colon. Well, I don't know if that's true anymore simply because they're different formulations, but you have to do your research. If you're getting nothing else from this video, please do your research on what helps with that. Because with the microbiome, what I found for myself is when mine starts to get into balance, all of a sudden things that I used to crave, like sugar and things like that, I stopped craving. So there are times when I would sit back and go, is it me that's craving this, or is it the other little critters or microbiome in there that's craving this? Which is an interesting point. So just because you're craving something, it could just mean something's out of balance. But what I encourage you to do is do your research, and somebody who is an expert at this. There are many people who specialize in this and the microbiome, but find out what their background is. Find out how they were trained. Find out what their background is, please. That's with any practitioner. Find out what their background is. I know for myself and TBM, we do have a microbiome point to do corrections for that. But I also believe that you probably need something like some kind of supplementation, then it's important to do your research, because then all of a sudden some symptoms can be relieved, such as not only cravings, but that kind of bloating or swelling or things like that. So I hope this video has been helpful for you just to start doing the research, because truly, it's almost like there's a microbiome war sometimes going on in our colon. And we want to make sure we have a good balance, because everything in life, and Chinese medicine is really good at this, everything in life is balance. And so I hope you find the correct balance for your specific gut. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to leave comments or questions, and I will definitely write back to you about what I know and what I don't know. Have a great day.